All right. Thank you, Latasha. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome to Road to Tacoma LitFest. This is a series, as I mentioned, this is a lead up to the festival, which is coming up on May 2nd. And we are very excited to talk to you about the books that inspired you and what kind of stuff do you read. But before we start, introduce yourself to people who may not know you, people who
Yeah.
are outside of Tacoma.
Okay. So I am Latasha Palmer. People most know me nowadays as the at-large city council member here. So that means citywide representation. Um, my family knows me as mom and sister. I have three kiddos and was raised in Tacoma and um, just like to serve my city any way possible, in both of those roles as a mom and as a representative.
And many congratulations. You have been in office for just over 2 months now. You ran a wonderful campaign. Before we switch to books and all the bookish discussions, uh, would you like to share if there was something that surprised you? Because this is your first campaign for public office, a political campaign that you ran. Now that you have been in office for about over two months, is there something that
Months.
surprised you?
Since I've been in office or when I ran?
No, since you have been in office.
Oh, okay. Let's see. There's just so much. Like Tacoma has about 4,000 employees and all working on all of the different aspects of Tacoma and so there's a lot to learn. I did the charter review process with Tacoma, and that's what kind of launched my whole interest in politics in Tacoma. And you learn about like the ins and outs of what should happen on paper, but when people are coming at you letting you know about the real world experience, and this is where we're at and this is where we would like to go, and these are the 4,000 people that are involved in that. It can be a lot. And so I'm still, getting my grounding and learning, which department does what and all of the things, but everyone's been super helpful and very available and accessible when I have questions. So that's been great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And again, we're delighted that you're in our council. We're looking forward to working with you and seeing our city grow. Um, all right, let's start with books now. Since this is a Lit Fest discussion, let's talk about some of the books that inspired you. What are some of the books that really moved you or something that changed the way you see the world?
Yeah. I think there's been a couple along the way. I like to call and I wanted to thank you for this because, a lot of the times you think about, maybe you have sayings that you picked up every now and then, but the process of going back and thinking about the books that I've read, they all come up. You were in a certain place in your life when you chose that book, or when you learned what you learned, and so it's really like a way to go back in time and remember who you were when you read that book. And so it's been a really cool exercise for me. um One of the earliest books that I thought about when I was remembering, was Where the Sidewalk Ends with Shel Silverstein. Silverstein, I don't know how you say that still, but um, that's probably the earliest book that I could remember really affecting me. And that one, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's a book of poetry, and it's like this thick, but the poems are pretty small. A lot of them are pretty short, and then they have like pictures and stuff that go along with them. But the poems are so well written, but also so kooky and kind of creative that it really gets your brain thinking creatively about the world and kind of looking at things a different way. Um, and so I think that kind of set the tone for how my brain learns till this day and how I think about things.
And and how did you find that book?
You know, I remember we had a copy in the house,
Hmm.
which was interesting because my family were not readers. So I don't know how it ended up in the house, but then I know we referred to it in school a couple of times too, but that was one of the books we had that I could read through at home.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and when we read books, sometimes people recommend it, sometimes we read about it, but so many times I've heard what you have just said, that it was just sitting there. It was like a
Hmm.
friend who was always there, and you take it for granted and you talk all the time, and then you read, and that's so important. I wish more of these sort of accidents happen where you have books sitting around, or you have somebody who was holding a book and that person left for to get a coffee for you, or left to put the parking back meter, and then you pick up the book and then what is he reading, and then you read, and then you read a couple of pages and you say, I want to buy this book, and then
Hmm.
that book ends up shaping you. And it happens to so many people, so many times. But is there anything in any book or any article that you think really shaped your sense of belonging or identity?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so a main reason I didn't have a lot of books in my home growing up was because I grew up in an environment that kind of learning wasn't encouraged. It was a very kind of restrictive environment, and when I was leaving that environment as an adult, um, it meant that I left a lot of the people that I was around and who I was in that environment, and so I was a little bit lost, and so it was a lot of reading at that time of trying to figure out who I am now without this other part of that identity that I grew up with. Um, and one of the books that I came across was The Heart of the Buddha's Teaching. Um, and a lot of people think about, Buddhism as a religion, but you can think of it as a philosophy as well. And so that really helped when I was kind of, so I was leaving a religion, but that kind of helped ground me in understanding. Um, I didn't quite have to find something else to fit into. Like it was more of, the way I lived my life and living by these different um they call it like the eightfold path and the four noble truths. Those have kind of been my benchmark when it comes to what I'm doing in life, and that's by I know if I mispronounce his name, but I think it's pronounced Thich Nhat Hanh. Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a very profound book. I have read that too. It's a lovely book. Highly, highly recommend. And now let's talk about some of the leadership. When you think of leadership as a position of as a role where you have to perform certain tasks, and you're responsible. Do you often go to certain books or certain blogs uh, to shape your leadership or philosophy?
Yeah. Um, I've read, books played a big role in understanding, because they give you more of a in-depth, especially if you're looking at a memoir or you're looking at an autobiography, you get to see the ups and downs of a person's life and not just like the things that you would see um that people want you to see, as far as like all the good things that these amazing powerful figures have done in their lives. And so one of the ones that I remember reading, she kind of I really connected with her memoir because she was, a couple parts of her identity I connected with. She was a black woman, and she ended up being a single mom, and um, but the work that she did with grassroots work and against all odds, really connected with me. And so that was Unbowed. It's a memoir from Wangari Maathai, and she's a cool figure out of Africa. She got her education here in the U.S., but out of Kenya, and she did like a grassroots um, project with trees and planting, and it sounds kind of minute, but the way that she did it, and how the being able to do it with all of who she was as again a woman, and a Black woman, in the time that she did it. This was around this in the set like 60s and 70s. It was just so inspiring to me, and I learned about, kind of again, the ups and downs of leadership and the role of resilience and sticking with, if you have a goal, you get it done. It's not going to be perfect. But as long as you stay with it, it's still possible. And she went to jail, they're just seeing like all of the trials and tribulations she went through, but still being able to lead lead a group of women to accomplish what she did. I learned a lot through that reading.
Mhm. Yeah, I love memoir and autobiographies are my favorite. It's exactly what you were saying. You get to know the person.
Hmm.
You get to live somebody's life when you read a good autobiography or a good memoir. It's so precious. Uh, and you were so present, when you were running the campaign, you were in the community, you were everywhere. We saw you at so many different places. During that time, do you recall trying to pick a book that would help you engage better with the community, or was there something that was nudging you inside to go and pick something, to read something from the past, or something that happened in the history that was inspiring that you could practice in your campaign?
Yeah. Well, with the campaign, um, let's see. It was busy. So there wasn't
Yeah,
a ton of reading happening during that time.
so hard to read
Um,
when you're campaigning. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of kind of learning the systems and how to navigate those. But maybe beforehand there was a book that I read that really helped me understand campaigning a little bit better. I can't remember the name of it, but it was about Bernie Sanders' campaign, and his campaign manager wrote a book kind of about their whole experience. And I think, that was way before I read that, way
Hmm.
before I even thought about campaigning, when I was more interested in kind of like the how do these things work? um and wanting to change things kind of from the outside. But looking back now at my campaign, I think that helped me understand, being able to approach my campaign of more of like a grassroots, and being
Hmm.
able to have that. I knew that because a lot of times there's like a formula, right, that people tell you you have to follow and for success. And I think reading that book helped me understand that no, you can experiment, and there is a level of creativity that you can bring and should bring to a campaign in order to find success. And I think that gave me maybe more permission in order to do that.
Yeah. And if you could just, let's say, you had all the time, which you don't, but let's just imagine if you have all the time and you had all the support, you had all the people around you to support you, and you could write a book. What
Oh my
genre would you
gosh.
pick and why?
Genre. Oh, I am a huge fan of sci-fi. Um,
Oh, that's so
and
cool. Yeah.
strangely enough, like maybe like dystopian sci-fi. And I think it gives like I'm a huge fan of Octavia Butler and like the Parable of the Sower series. Um, because it gives you a look at like what could happen in the future, without you having to experience all that craziness and how people can get through times like that. And so it's like they're like thought experiments for me. Like what if something was slightly changed now, like what could our future look like, and how would we respond to that? Or if this new technology is introduced, how would how would humanity um, work with that, or how would that change things? And so I love sci-fi.
People love sci-fi in Tacoma, Latasha. I am not a sci-fi fan, but I have now become because I know that our community is reading sci-fi. And Ted Chiang is coming. He's one of the keynote speakers at
Mm,
our LitFest on May 2nd. And he's very well-known writer, but one of his short stories, The Story of Your Life, became a film called Arrival, which is probably one of the most well-known science fiction movie.
mm.
So we are all very excited, and people are writing to me saying, "Yay, Ted is coming! I love sci-fi." And I'm
I
like, "My
love that.
God, I know so many of us here in our community are fond of and horror also. That is
Yeah,
also very surprising to me how many people are involved in that
I
genre."
can't. I can't do the horror. But also, I have to point out that sci-fi and fantasy are often like grouped together, and I think
Hmm.
that they're just so different. So sometimes it's hard to find a good sci-fi book because there's like more fantasy books, I think, out there, and I'm not as drawn to those as I am like the actual sci-fi.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, the combination is so interesting. We are doing a session in April from one of these authors who is very well known. She's wonderful. But she combines the romance and fantasy.
Mm,
So the intersection of two different genres, and it's a very apparently it's very popular. It's all new to me. I'm not a writer. I'm not a publisher. But just to work with all of these folks and see how much thoughts and permutation and combination is happening within the literary world. Um, all right, let's switch to Tacoma now. Now that you're working with the city government here in Tacoma, are there things that you think more about than other things, and does it nudge you to read more because you want to see certain kind of growth in Tacoma?
yeah, I think it's trying to think a little bit more about how we organize. Right now we're living in such a crazy, crazy time, and resources that were seen as kind of like it's always going to be there, or that we've kind of come to depend on, especially like at the federal level. Um, they're not as stable as people had hoped. And I think you find a solution to that problem when you look at things from community as being a resource, and what are the things that we can empower people to care about and to work with each other on, or to share their resources with their neighbors, so that they're not as dependent on the city and on these crumbling crazy systems, as they've been in the past. And that's really led me to look into and read more about, there's Rebel Cities is what it's called. And so it's looking at basically it's called having like a right to the city, and how do you change systems to better facilitate that and to encourage that, where people feel like the city belongs to them, and again they have a say in building from the ground up, instead of us saying from the top down, what the city should be. Because then you miss out on so much. You miss out on all of the different um, things that people bring and all of their needs. If you're just kind of building something in a bubble and not considering how everyone might use this. And I think you also consider it from not just everyone, but like the maybe the least advantaged person, how would they utilize this space, or how could we help them utilize this space or make the most of it? Then you start designing a city a little bit differently. So I'm very interested in urban design and like the role of that, but then also just like how to recreate systems within the city to facilitate that.
And in your background, we are seeing some of the most iconic places of Tacoma. We have the Mount Rainier is out. We're seeing the lovely bridge, the Glass Museum. We also have the Dome and Union Station.
You know what's funny is I just realized when you were talking about this picture that this is
Hmm.
not a like you can't get everything in the shot that way. I didn't realize that it was brought all together, but
Yeah, yeah. It is all brought together, but it's such a lovely way. It's such a lovely view of Tacoma. It brings all
yes.
of the iconic. So my question is, if let's say, and this is purely speak from your experience. It is not the people around you or me, but just if you had the full autonomy and a movie were to be made about Tacoma, from your experience, what should it be about? What would it be about if you could approve it? You don't have to
Mm,
make the film, but if you had the say about the story of Tacoma, and you could say, okay, you can check a box, a bunch of uh, some, beauty of Tacoma, schools of Tacoma, colleges of Tacoma, whatever. What would you say? What would it be about?
mm. I think um I think Tacoma has such a rich history, and I think we've learned a lot from that history. There's lessons that we've learned. I think one story that maybe hasn't been told a lot, we've done a better job at recognizing, the redlining story. We've done a better job of recognizing, what happened here with the Chinese Reconciliation Act. One of the stories that is kind of floating out there that folks aren't as familiar with is kind of the urban renewal that happened downtown in order to put like the Tacoma Dome in and put the railway in and the freeway in. Downtown was, from my understanding, and I don't have the whole story. That's why I think it's a story that needs to be told. Is that it was, basically a neighborhood of people of color, and I believe more predominantly Black folks that were living there. That was kind of cleared out, and it would be interesting to understand, how that happened and where they went, and there maybe hear some of those experiences because we need those stories told so that we don't accidentally repeat them, right? So I think that would be the one that I would like to tell.
Yeah, I think Michael Sullivan, who is one of the very well-known historian, he also did a public session on this. When the I-5 was built and it got divided, it led to a lot of internal displacement of people, and
Mm-hmm.
that really ruptured the community in so many ways. It was not just a new infrastructure coming and old infrastructure being moved, and then everything will be fine. It did something to the community. It divided it, it displaced it, and it never could come together in the same way.
Yeah, and I think it's that's Tacoma's part of the story, but that was the other thing I was wanting to communicate here was, a lot of my learning came from essays,
Mhm.
reading essays, and a lot of essays that I read, especially during like university, were around like deconstruction and how that displaced folks, but then how that those things even came about, and um if we're thinking about the economics of a city, um how that affected who was coming into the city, and um now we have, if we think about like Detroit and some other cities, how those factories leaving affected the city. And so there's a whole lot more to think about, like the makeup and how a city is now, than just there's houses and there's the people, but there's also like there's design and there's systems that also work to create the city. And so I think Tacoma's old enough and interesting enough to have its own story with that, but it's one that, reading essays from cities around the US and beyond really taught me that, that's something that's been normal in the history of a lot of cities.
Mm. And talking of communities, usually, how do you try to understand a community that you are not uh, that you that you're not aware of, that you don't know much about, but you have to understand them? What is generally what do you do
Yeah.
to
Um,
understand somebody who is not like you or someone who you have not engaged before?
yeah. I think it's kind of it comes naturally to me to be curious about those things because just my identity as a black mixed woman, it's made it so that I don't quite fit in this box or this box. And so, I grew up around all sorts of folks, even just here in Tacoma, right? And I'm kind of racially ambiguous to a lot of folks, and so I kind of fit. I've been able to fit in and and learn from different folks. I grew up with folks within the Latina community, and um, but there's still a lot out there that I don't know, and I think I approach it because travel hasn't been available to me as much as maybe some other folks. I'm a huge fan of, I think Tacoma's really blessed with a lot of um, the like festivals and events that we have. I've been able to go to like the New Year celebrations that we just had with a lot of our API population. Um, I've been able to go to um, what was that? I can't remember the event down at the Buddhist temple, but we have so much access to different people, and so I think going to those different things has been uh, eye-opening to me, but then also, um, you know, I kind of mentioned before that a lot of my reading and I'm interested in philosophy from around the world and in different beliefs. And so that's been a lot of my reading too, has been finding um, kind of the things that maybe originated in different parts around the world, but have come to be like kind of like universal truths.
Hmm.
Um, and so there's always a little bit of a through line between in any culture that there's kind of that basic thing of we're all connected. Um, and I found, yeah. So I guess, experiences and, being open to trying new things, which I love. I am a true Sagittarius. And so that's kind of just found me in some interesting situations where, I'm experiencing different cultures just because I made myself available to that. But then reading and film too. I'm a big fan of that being able to transport you places that you might not be able to travel as well.
And you mentioned traveling. Latasha, traveling is expensive. Traveling is not easy. There's too much of logistics in it. It's too many dependencies on it. But do you see, in terms of how it could influence us, some parallels between traveling and reading? Do you
Oh,
see
for sure.
reading as form of traveling?
Yeah, absolutely. Traveling, anytime you go to someplace new, it's going to teach you something. It's going to reroute those neurotransmitters in some kind of way, because you're experiencing the world in a way that you haven't experienced it before. And I think that that's why I'm such a big fan of the sci-fi genre, because it particularly does that well, where it transports you to literally like a whole new world.
Mm.
It's beyond what you could see here on Earth. And so um even within the galaxy. You know, it takes you to some interesting spots. And so um, you start to think about, um, you know, how things are, again, how things are the same in all places, but then how things are different, without having to actually like physically be there for sure.
Yeah, just recognizing reading as a form of traveling, it does something to your brain. You know,
Hmm.
we don't do that. We often don't do that. We put traveling in a box, like traveling in our mind. Oh, we have to buy a ticket, get ready, pack your bag, board a plane, board a train, all these things. But, you know, if you really unbundle, where is the learning coming from when you travel? It's all of those things come when you read. If you just set your brain, you know, and your brain gets to
The thing
work in the
too,
same way.
yeah, is when you know, we were talking about autobiographies and memoirs as well. It's the same thing. Like when you're traveling, you're hitting up a lot of the tourist spots or, you know, the things that you've been told you should go see. Whereas,
Yeah.
you know, if you read a book or an autobiography from somebody who's lived in a different place, you're experiencing that place as a person who's lived there, right? And so that's an experience that you might not be able to even get physically traveling somewhere where you get that experience in a book.
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting that one is the book itself. So you read whatever the book is saying to you, but also the story of where that story is coming from, the story of the book itself, the author. I have just recently read again Steve Biko's life, and it was written by the author who had to basically leave his country, South Africa, in order to release that book because it was
Mm.
illegal back in the day to quote Biko, to write about Biko, to even, and Biko was not allowed to talk to two or three people at the same time. All of this was when he was about 30 years old. I mean, as an individual, he had become such a threat to the state that he was barred from all kinds of things. But this gentleman, um, he wanted to write and he had to smuggle things about Biko and because he couldn't publish, so he had to leave the country with his family. So one is the story and all, but the backstories of the books are so important for, especially for young people to know, and it's so inspiring. What do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. I did a lot of reading on because I thought I was going to study Africa and I ended up
Hmm.
studying um, African American, the whole diaspora, but specifically African American history. But I read a few books in it was an urban studies class but it was based in African cities. And you know, you think you're going to read a lot of um, you know, this is what this, you know, the infrastructure, right? But we read about the people to learn about the cities, and we read novels. We read one that was based in Lagos, Nigeria, about this kid growing up there, and it was just like this whole new understanding of what happens there, what could happen there. That one was called Graceland. Great book. And then we read another one from Chimamanda Adichie. I can't remember. I know I butchered her name as well, called Purple Hibiscus. And that was another one that was based, I believe it was Nigeria. So we kind of took these books and they took us to um, different parts of Africa, right? And we
Mhm.
kind of same thing where we understood, you know, we got a glimpse into the city life in all of these different cities around Africa from these different novels and memoirs.
All right, it's 11:38. Latasha, I just have two more questions so that we can finish on time. One is what book would you recommend, or an essay, or a magazine article, or anything, any piece of writing would you recommend to somebody who wants to understand how city works and functions?
Yeah. So I think it's the same thing where you know, you might think about you should read a book from that a politician wrote or and I think that that's one thing, right? That's one thing you could do. but I think it's more of an understanding of people and how cities shape people and how systems shape people. And so one of the ones that I particularly like that kind of brings together my interest in um and I guess all the things that are involved with racial identity, but then also um the philosophy of like everything's connected it's a book called Racing to Justice by John A. Powell, and he talks about othering and belonging and how um, spirituality is kind of built into what what we should be thinking about when we're talking about living together and building a society that works for everybody.
Racing to Justice.
Yes,
All right,
yes.
that's on my reading list now. Thank you. And finally, anything specific to Tacoma economic growth or equity and opportunities in Tacoma? Is there something people should read about to understand Tacoma better?
Mm. I didn't really ever have to read about Tacoma because I grew up here. It was
Yeah.
kind of learned experience. I I guess, when I was doing my research, when I actually had to do research on Tacoma to write an
Mhm.
essay, um, I looked at we Tacoma has an interesting race and equity index.
Mhm.
Not that that's a book or anything, but it's a story through data, I think. And to see kind of again how the history of what's happened in the city is still currently affecting the city. So if anyone hasn't checked that out, I think that gives you a lot of information to think about and um, gives you an idea of the identity of Tacoma now.
And what about news? If people want to learn, let's just assume people who are not in Tacoma, but they want to learn about Tacoma. Where should they get some news? Where do you get your news about Tacoma?
I'm, I'm gonna say the local. I love the local magazines. We have like Tacoma Weekly here and Grit City Magazine, and I think there's other ones that are bigger and maybe more widely distributed. But
Mhm.
if you're wanting to get like that, what we were talking about, that
Mhm.
viewpoint for people who live here and um, are invested in what's happening in Tacoma, those would be the sources, I think.
All right. Thank you so much, Latasha. This was lovely. So good to learn about all of the books that inspired you, and thank you for all the recommendations. You have added one book on my list. I'll pick it up and I'll find out if we have some author who can talk about this. I'll let you know.
I
But
would
thank you
love
so
to.
much for taking the time today. Lovely
Thank you,
talking with
so.
you.
Bye.
Bye.